one thing to keep in mind with logical reasoning is that all the arguments or all the passages basically fall into two categories, right? You're either going to read an argument or you're going to read a set of facts. And you don't know until you read it. But once you read it, it's pretty obvious. It's not always obvious, but it's pretty obvious. If it's an argument, there's a conclusion that the person is trying to prove. And if it's not an argument, you can kind of tell because it's just like fact, 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 and none of the facts are supporting the other facts. It's just like data points, right? Okay, now, if it's an argument, then what you're trying to decide is whether or not the evidence that they gave in that argument proves the conclusion. And in most cases, it doesn't. And if it's not an argument, if it's just a set of facts, then 9 times out of 10, the question is going to ask you what must be true given what was said, right? So one way to think about this, if you have an argument, you're looking at premises that add up to a conclusion, and the question is, do the premises prove the conclusion, right? Does this evidence equal this conclusion? Whereas if it's not an argument, well, you'll be given premises or pieces of evidence, facts, and there's no conclusion, but they'll usually ask you which one of the following answers must be true given what these things say, or which one of the following answers is most strongly supported by these premises. The bottom line is that whether you are given an argument or given a set of facts, no matter what you're given, you're still being asked to decide whether the combination of what is proven by those facts, right? In this case, they're just going to ask you that directly. They're going to say, hey, which one of the following answers must be true? In this case, they don't ask you that directly, but that's what you're essentially figuring out. You're saying, okay, well, do these premises prove this conclusion? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then you figure out why. That's the flaw of the argument. And if they do, then great, the argument is valid, and the question might ask you something else. It might be like, okay, well, what's the main point, or what's the structure of the argument, or what argument is parallel in reasoning. Logical reasoning passages are going to fall into one of two types, but even though they are very different in some ways on the surface, when you dig deeper, essentially all you're trying to do is make sure you understand each fact that was given and what logically follows from each of those facts when they're combined together. Okay? That's the core skill. And that's the core skill that's tested not only in logical reasoning, but also in games. In games, they're just giving you random facts, and then they're asking you what must be true, what has to follow from those rules, right? And reading comp is the same thing. They're just giving it to you in a different format. They're giving you 15 sentences, and they're saying, okay, given these 15 sentences, what has to be true? What follows from these sentences, right? So although the test can feel very different in some ways, it all comes down to, do you understand what claims were stated, and do you understand what logically follows from those claims? Okay? So what's the best way, in my mind, to tackle this sort of framework? Is to carefully understand each sentence as you read it in the argument, and then decide, is this an argument or a set of facts? If it's an argument, figure out whether the premises prove the conclusion. In most cases they don't, and then try to figure out why they don't. If it's not an argument, just figure out what is proven by those facts, and then 9 times out of 10, that's what they're going to ask you for in the answers.